I'm here because Andy's having some much needed treatment for a few days. All our best wishes are with him. He'll be back next week. Now let's take a look at the front pages. The Sunday Times lead is about Brexit, but all minds in journalism, at least, are on the face of A.A. Gill. It says a giant of journalism. We'll talk about him in just a second, who died of very aggressive cancer at the age of 62. Their main news story, the new court case threatening to derail Brexit. A familiar tale to watchers and listeners of the BBC. James Landau, my colleague, did that story a few days ago. The Sunday Telegraph story, Iraq witch hunt fixer paid with public cash. This is about the cases brought against the British military. The Observer is on social care. Shock figures show Tory plans making social care worse. Interesting story in here and in the Express that we may all pay a lot more in our council tax to avoid that crisis in social care. The Mail is having fun with Number 10's toxic texts over the PM's trousers. We'll hear exactly who said what in just a moment. And The People continuing its good work on the NHS. Dad dies after 90-minute wait for ambulance. More problems there in the NHS. Well, let's welcome again our newspaper reviewers, Sarah Baxter, Tim Montgomerie, Owen Jones. For you, Sarah, for the family, if you like, which any newspaper is, producing the Sunday Times, this is above all a sad morning.
This is a very sad morning. I certainly wasn't expecting to talk about the death of our beloved colleague A.A. Gill this morning. I mean, Adrian characteristically has had a say himself here. He's on the cover
on the front page of the magazine.
He's on the front page of the magazine talking about his cancer, talking about his love of the NHS and some of the problems with getting badly needed drugs within it. And he's just the best of us. I mean, I can't believe he's gone. He was the best writer, the funniest, the fiercest, the most compassionate in surprising ways. Extraordinary and gifted man.
Tim, because he was so fierce, because sometimes to be on the receiving end of an A.A. Gill restaurant review or TV review was pretty painful, it's sometimes easy to think that, you know, he wouldn't be a likeable man, but those who knew him say that's completely wrong.
Hugely likeable, yes, and I think some of the reaction on Twitter overnight as well, some of the people he's condemned and has probably been known to be a critic of, saying how much in their personal dealings with him they found him to be a very warm person. And this essay in the magazine today, it's so readable, and it's about him and it's about his struggles with cancer, but in terms of commentary on the state of the NHS, its strengths and weaknesses, it's brilliant political analysis as well.
It is really fascinating, isn't it, what he has to say about what you can get from the health service, what it's good at and what it's less good at, Owen.
Absolutely. I mean, it's astonishingly tragic, because the thing with cancer, it's a terrible illness, as anyone who knows loved ones who's been afflicted with it, but normally you get a long goodbye, don't you? And this was very short indeed. I've had the honour of being on the receiving end myself of his vitriol for my overly youthful features. But, you know, I didn't often agree with him, but I always found his prose absolutely beautiful. It's a real loss.
I just want to say as well how adored he was by all our colleagues. He, you know, everyone, high and low at the Sunday Times, he was just such a kind and generous person, and he mentored so many young journalists.
Well, let's talk about some of the stories too that I think he would have had a big smile on his face about, not least, Tim, the war. And it does feel now like a war, doesn't it, between the man we're not supposed to call Boris anymore. He is, of course, Mr. Johnson and Mrs. May.
Well, the Sun on Sunday is still calling him Boris, and they have an interesting sort of account of the behind-the-scenes discussions taking place between him and the woman who appointed him. And, you know, why did she appoint him is his kind of question to her. And he's quoted as saying to her, "Take me as I am. Please stop trying to slap me down because I won't change." And Frank Gardner, the BBC security correspondent on your Normal Man and Nick yesterday, the Today programme, was saying, you know, people in the Gulf region, as around the world, part of why he's interesting is because they don't quite know what he's going to say. They find him an interesting commentator on world affairs, and trying to neuter him, when actually not many times Owen and I agree, but what he said on Saudi Arabia, the problems of that regime, was true. And if we can't get to a point where the Foreign Secretary can't say some things that are true about our allies, while at the same time maintaining good relations, then that's fundamentally a failure in diplomacy.
Sarah?
A little bit of your heart soars when someone sticks it to the Saudis, doesn't it? And
Not
idea-
Theresa May's heart. I think it's a very, very icy
Well,
indeed.
she has a different job to do, but I think most of us would love to see a bit more truth-telling like that.
He's messed it up, I have to say. I mean, on Saudi Arabia, it's become a taboo in British politics that we don't talk about the fact we have this head-chopping dictatorship, which is a threat to national security. It's exporting extremism across the world, which I think Boris Johnson was right to draw attention to. But in terms of other splits within the Conservative Party...
Well, other evidence as well of Number 10's brutality when it wants to be brutal.
Very brutal. Now, we've dealt a lot with Labour's acrimonial battles, but not so much with the Tories. And as it says here, the Tories at war, it says. And this was over Nicky Morgan, who's a leading soft Brexit, if you like, Tory MP, who criticised the trousers, the expensive trousers of the Prime Minister. Didn't go down that well in Number 10. She's
Leather trousers worth £995.
People have been talking about this for weeks. It began with a Sunday Times interview.
It is a lot for trousers, you have to admit. But I think this is interesting because, I mean, she's now been banned for meetings and it's all, very big.
Well, tell us what the text says. So
But, the text said, don't bring that woman to Number 10 again. That was to Alistair Burt from Fiona Hill, who's the Joint Chief of Staff to Theresa May. That didn't go down well with Nicky Morgan at all. No man brings me to any meeting. Your team invites me. If you don't want my views in future meetings, you need to tell me. And Fiona Hill replied, well, he just did, so there.
So
very mature, very grown up.
Off with their head.
But I love that. No man tells me.
No man.
I think that's fantastic. She's getting very, very frank. She's even got a touch of the Borises these days, Nicky Morgan, hasn't she?
But
She's really
people were a little
saying what she thinks.
sceptical sometimes about her as a cabinet minister, but since she's become a backbench rebel,
she was very
they seem to be
sensible
warming to
and head down as a cabinet minister, and this is, she's coming into her full glory.
I think part of the problem is that the aides that Theresa May had when she was Home Secretary, there was often quite a difficult relationship with David Cameron, and they were her lead defenders. They haven't, I think, quite adjusted to the fact that Theresa May is in charge now, and they need to be a little bit more gracious, a little bit more permissive, rather than being so defensive of their boss.
And never put anything in a text either, because you know
No.
very well
it
it's
always
going to
appears.
leak.
You can read them in full in
Yes.
the Mail on Sunday and in the Sunday Times as well. Now, meanwhile, though, that is one small bit of lightness in some pretty grim newspapers otherwise. The papers have also got our colleague Lise Doucette, who's done some remarkable reporting this week from Syria on the latest grim news from Aleppo.
Yeah, well, Aleppo really is entering its final hours. I mean, there's 85% of rebel territory has now fallen. And I think when we read about the suffering of the children of Aleppo, we should bear in mind who's causing it. And Putin and Russia has a lot to answer for here, as well as President Assad. And I know we'll be talking about that too later. But I just want to say that this story is not always on the front page, but it should always be in our hearts, because this is there are absolute war crimes going on every day in Aleppo right now.
Boris Johnson has got praise this week, Tim, for telling the truth in inverted commas about Saudi Arabia. Some people think Donald Trump is doing the same about Russia when he's saying, in effect, look, forget what you think about Russia, forget what you think about Putin. We got to do deals with the man over sorting out IS or Daesh, depending how you call them.
Well, up until yesterday, one of the thoughts we had was that Mitt Romney might have been Trump's Secretary of State. And Mitt Romney was the person you may remember 4 years ago during the debates with Obama, who identified Russia as America's strategic #1 adversary. Now, we're not going to get Mitt Romney, it appears, as the Secretary of State. We're going to get an oil billionaire who's very pro-Putin. Yeah. And yes, of course, Nick, you're right. We should talk to Putin. But there's an article here in The Atlantic, the American magazine, that in detail catalogues how over 20 years this former KGB agent, Vladimir Putin, has schemed to undermine the democracies of the West, and how his plans are now reaching conclusion. It's a chilling read. And
he got an order of friendship from Putin.
Well, excellent.
I mean, it's fascinating because in the 20th century it was always this Reds under the bed, the left in the ally to Moscow. But now it's the populist right which is ascendant across the Western world, which is enamoured with Putin, whether it be the National Front in France, much of UKIP as well here, the Italian Northern League, and of course Vladimir Putin.
And Corbyn's Labour Party, though. It's not just the populist right.
I don't think Corbyn's Labour Party have come out suggesting in any way they support Putin's regime.
That was partly Peter Tatchell's row, though, yesterday with Jeremy Corbyn.
His
failure to condemn Aleppo.
But Trump, UKIP and the rest are open about their love and admiration for much of Putin and Putinism.
Yep.
And what's disturbing as well, if you take the National Front in France, they're getting soft loans from Russian banks. So I think it's alarming, and we do need to hold to account, I think, these forces.
Don't want to intrude too much on private grief, but it wasn't a great day for Jeremy Corbyn yesterday with those protests that we've just been talking about, and not a great day when you read the papers either.
No, well, I mean, there's a story here, slightly mischievous story in the Mail on Sunday, about suggesting Clive Lewis, the Shadow Business Secretary, is talking of standing. I know Clive Lewis, so as a disclaimer, he's a friend of mine. But
when you say mischievous, they've never crossed his lips when you've spoken to him.
Never.
That maybe the two of you could solve the Labour Party's problems that way?
Absolutely no chance whatsoever that he's in any way plotting to take over. There's not a vacancy. But he is a rising star for the future. He's got a very compelling backstory, served in the army, grew up in a council estate in the Midlands, very good communicator.
So you can't foresee the circumstances, as someone once said, that he will replace Jeremy Corbyn as leader?
Well, I mean, there's absolutely no way he's plotting to take over, and it's just
no plan.
Totally made up.
Words noted. But more trouble from the former leader there in the Observer.
Well, this is thoughtful from Ed Miliband, and I mean, again, we do, I think, given the focus on the internal woes of Labour, we fail to hold the government to account on their own complete absence of any clear Brexit plan at all, where they're talking about maximum access, this is what Ed Miliband's talking about, to the single market, whilst also saying that we won't be subject to the European Court of Justice, which looks over, for example, disputes within the single market. And he's making the point that the vast majority of people, including people who voted to leave, won't accept any financial cost whatsoever. And the argument Labour need to be making is a deal that puts jobs, the economy and the living standards of the country before anything else.
Just
and
briefly,
that's not what the Tories are.
you were one of those people, possibly one of the most powerful people that told the Labour Party to go in the direction of a Corbyn leadership. There are plenty of people, even on your side, the argument are beginning to say, maybe it's just simply not going to work. In sadness, we need to move on.
Well, I think the leadership clearly needs to get its act together. And look, the Labour Party on all sides has had this completely massive bust-up over the last year and a half, rather than focusing on the Conservatives. But yes, the leadership has made lots of mistakes, and they need to get their act together, because it's not about one man, it's about the future of the Labour Party.
It's not about getting its act together, I don't think, and it's not about focusing on the Conservatives. I think it's about focusing on issues that everybody else cares about and is talking about.
Of course,
That's what Labour seems to be ignoring.
We'll be talking about
jobs
just that with Diane Abbott in just a moment. I'm sorry to cut you short, but that's a question we want to have time to put to her. Sarah Baxter, Tim Montgomerie, Owen Jones, thank you very much indeed.